1. Night of the Black Crows. To utter the words, "once upon a time," is to foreshadow a story of magic. When we hear that familiar phrase, we know there will be heroic and brave characters, or that we're about to discover an enchanted castle resting under a spell. But beyond the royal matches and courageous quests of those well-known tales, once upon a time, there was an even deeper magic. It thrived quietly, unobserved, in the wild places beyond the castle walls. There it was free to do its work out of the sight of normal people. Some of the unsung heroes in the world of Once Upon a Time were familiarly known as witches. And it's no secret they didn't have a very good reputation. Cast as the villain in more than one story of princes and princesses, these wise women of magic were often regarded with suspicion and mistrust. However, anyone who truly learned the secrets of their arts also knew that witches did a lot of good, even if they rarely received any credit. While they were solitary figures by nature, these dames of the enchanted world did not do their work without companionship. Although human visitors were scarce, almost every witch eventually adopted some type of animal familiar. Now we tend to think of witches and cats as being linked, but the truth is that cats are creatures of civilization. They live and thrive near people. In keeping with their taste for privacy, witches prefer animals who crave the secrecy of the hidden places where a wise woman can best do her work. This brings us to our story. You'll find that it's about one such animal familiar. This witch's companion happens to be a very intelligent crow. You may have first met this mysterious bird as a small player in another story, but now you will hear the bird's own beautiful, dark tale. Let's go back to a new kind of beginning. It starts with the practitioner of good magic, who claimed the crow as her friend. Once upon a time, in a humble part of the world of kings, queens, and castles, there was an ordinary village girl. Her name was Hester. As a child, she was very bright and inquisitive. Her family was not wealthy, and there was no opportunity for her to go to school. However, she applied herself with enthusiasm to any craft or trade that she undertook. Household tasks bored her, but she could be seen asking questions of the merchants, the tradespeople, and the wandering travelers who passed through the town. Hester was a good girl who tried to be responsible. However, once in a while, she was late completing her chores when she lost track of time somewhere. There was so much to see out in the world that staying in her parents' house or in the small gardens around it felt stifling. One chore that Hester liked best was caring for the family's small flock of geese. She was quite good at it, and she seemed to be more successful than anyone at keeping the birds happy and getting them to produce lots of eggs. In general, she had a very soft spot for animals and could often be found lingering with a neighborhood cat or tossing crumbs to a squirrel. Unfortunately, all the curiosity in the world couldn't get a girl like Hester any big opportunities in the villages of far away and long ago. They were such provincial, isolated places. As she grew up, it became more and more obvious that her parents would soon expect her to marry. After all, she was a very pleasant young lady, and she would make a respectable housekeeper. But Hester wasn't interested in a future as a wife, tending her cottage in the same village where she was born. She had a growing curiosity about the world, and she dreamed of setting off on a dusty road out of town and seeing what lay beyond. Alas, she couldn't imagine how to do that. Everyone she had ever known lived right where they'd been born. Who among them could tell her how to see the world? It happened that one day a kindly old woman came to town. She was selling medicinal herbs in the market out of a small pushcart. As she always did, Hester lingered inquisitively around the woman, asking about the benefits of one mixture after another. The lady was very obliging, explaining them all. With each herb or remedy explained, Hester's excitement grew. How marvelous, she thought, to so deeply understand the workings of these gifts from nature. Wistfully, she reflected that she would like to learn this important art. Later, as she was tending to her geese, Hester saw the same old woman walking away from town and taking the small path into the forest. All at once, she was seized with the desire to follow her and perhaps beg the lady to teach her. Hester knew that her parents would be fine without her help around the house. She would have been getting married and leaving soon anyway. Why settle for a future as a wife when she could be a botanist and a healer? With the impulsiveness of youth, she decided to follow on the heels of the mysterious old woman. As night fell and her parents went early to bed, Hester quickly packed a little bit of food and a change of clothing in a cloth bag and slipped out the door. Taking a lantern from the front step, she hurried off in the direction of the forest path. She felt sure that with her youthful speed, she could catch up with the woman on the trail through the woods. Hester walked boldly into the embrace of the forest, the lantern casting a glow to light her way. She'd been down this path many times before and had played in the woods as a child, but it was not very long before she'd traveled further than she had ever done before. With the leaves rustling in the darkness and the moon casting an eerie light through the tangled tree branches, she began to doubt herself a little bit. She pushed down her worries. At this point, she told herself, she must surely be catching up. Such an elderly woman could not go very fast, she reasoned. She was sure that if she kept up her pace, she would come upon the stranger fairly soon. Hester imagined stumbling upon the lady any minute, perhaps curled up by the smoldering ashes of a cozy campfire. The path became faint, and eventually Hester's lantern burned out. Having come too far to turn back, the girl bravely put one foot in front of the other, using the silvery moonlight and her sense of touch to guess where the cleared path continued. She was now deep in the forest. As the shadows danced around her, playing tricks on her mind, she began to truly regret this adventure, but there was no good place to stop now. Hester pushed onward, and eventually she was rewarded by the lifting of the darkness when the grey light of dawn finally relieved the gloom around her. Just when Hester felt she couldn't walk another step, she heard a woman singing. It was a happy little tune, and the exhausted girl could tell that it was coming from somewhere nearby, just around the bend. The trail widened ahead of her, and following it, Hester stepped into a clearing. In the center, a snug little white cottage sat nestled under a shingled roof. Chickens pecked away around the garden. There was a wooden rack standing off to the side, on which bunches of herbs were hung drying. Smoke curled from the chimney of the house, suggesting a welcoming fire was ablaze in the hearth. As she gazed upon the cozy scene, dull and tired, she felt oddly like she was suspended in a dream. Blossoms drifted lightly through the air, borne upon sweet breezes. The very trees seemed to lean closer to one another, as if sheltering a secret. From somewhere in the yard, the delicate sound of wind chimes floated towards her. Hester didn't know how long she stood there, but she was pulled from her reverie by the sight of the old woman she had been following, who emerged from the cottage. The lady saw her and appeared oddly unsurprised to find Hester in her garden, gazing thoughtfully. The kindly-looking lady stood drying her hands on an apron that was tied around her waist. She seemed to be considering the girl carefully. Hester didn't say a word, examining her as well. She took in the woman's long gray hair, tied back loosely, and her well-worn shoes and simple clothing. More than anything, she felt her intelligent gaze appraising her from head to toe. Before Hester could formulate an explanation for her uninvited visit, the woman nodded as if satisfied. Then, behaving like it was the obvious course of action, she told Hester to come along inside and have some breakfast. This was the beginning of Hester's new life. For even she hadn't really thought deep down that she was merely following the old woman to make a short visit. A bed was made up for the new arrival, and the girl settled right into life at the cottage. In no time at all, she was sharing the daily chores and learning everything she could about herbs and medicine from her new mentor. Hester felt very at home living in the little house in the woods. Each day was an adventure as she slowly came to understand the mysteries of the forest, the habits of the animals, the phases of the moon, and even the scents on the wind. These became important sources of information for her as she learned the ways of the wilderness and how to best harness its bounty. She and the old woman got along quite well, as they had similar temperaments, and the younger woman was able to assist her elder with many tasks that had become more difficult for her as she advanced in age. As the weeks and months went on, the wise old lady began to impart greater secrets to her young apprentice. The girl learned that her teacher could interact with nature in such a way that some would call it magic. To her, however, casting a spell was merely understanding the ways of the woods and how her feminine power tapped into her surroundings. And first and foremost, this, the wise woman stressed, she always used her knowledge for good. Alongside her, Hester gradually became a benevolent wise woman as well. Superstitious gossips might have called both of them witches, but the labels of less insightful people didn't much bother them, and they rarely appeared in town. One of the old lady's favorite daily habits was to feed the birds. Most people are suspicious of crows, accusing them of bringing bad luck, or perhaps rightly so, of stealing food. The good witch in the forest, however, was on excellent terms with an entire flock of these intelligent creatures. Each morning, she would scatter some stale bread for them, inviting them to linger in the garden. In return, they brought her small gifts of appreciation, shiny things, colorful things. Sometimes Hester could swear they brought her secrets that they whispered to her as she walked among them. More than once, her mentor had stood amid the crows with one bird resting on her shoulder and nodded as if she were having a conversation. A single crow in particular separated from its flock and stayed around the cottage all the time. Many people don't realize how sensitive these birds are, but Hester came to understand how satisfying its companionship could be. Listening, helping, or just sitting and observing. The friendly bird seemed to be a part of almost everything the wise woman did there at the little house in the woods. There was a special bond between the majestic dark bird and the good witch. The seasons continued in their unending cycle, and one year blended into another. Then one day, the witch told Hester that the time had come when she would leave the cottage in the woods and journey to live with her sisters. She was leaving the cottage to Hester to carry on her work. The younger woman was nervous about the idea of losing her mentor. After all, she protested, she had so much to learn. At this, the gray-haired old lady shook her head kindly. She told Hester that she underestimated herself and that she had learned everything she needed to know in order to take her place as the wise woman of the forest. She urged her student to trust herself and what she had become because she was worthy of this place and its precious magic. Hester woke the next morning and the old woman was gone. The new mistress of the hidden cottage took her tea out into the garden and watched the clearing lighten as the sun rose above the forest. While she stood there, she grappled with the idea that she was now the woman who lived in this cottage, that she was the witch of the woods. In this way, she watched the daylight brighten the land around her. All of a sudden, she was distracted from her thoughts to see the old black crow which had landed on a nearby branch, cocking its head to the side. It regarded her. Their eyes met, and somehow she knew that this was the last time the old crow would be there. Just as her mentor had retired to the comfort of family, the crow would do the same. She scattered half of her breakfast to the faithful bird, and the crow took it daintily. Then, with a flurry of its raven-colored wings, it was gone. But if Hester feared being alone, she need not have worried. She didn't realize it, but even as she became mistress of this enchanted hideaway, a new familiar would bind itself to her. A new partnership would be forged. She would not be solitary for long. You see, what many people fail to realize about crows is that they live in dedicated family groups, staying together for generations. They even share the upbringing of baby crows. The older brothers and sisters will help tend the nests when their parents are gone. Crows will flock together, sometimes in the thousands, to sleep at night. These groups of birds are unique to all others, having their own dialect. What might sound like a plain call or a click or a rattle to a human ear is nonetheless a language of love. On the occasion when crows must join new flocks, they also have to learn a new dialect in order to fit in. As intelligent as they are, and as much as they are bound to one another, crows also pass down knowledge from one generation to the next. The lessons of life and the warnings of the elders benefit their children and their children's children. And that is how Hester came to have a trusty new friend. When her mentor bequeathed Hester the cottage, the elder crow returned to its flock for good. However, the retiring crow passed the witching legacy on to one of its children. One of the most intelligent, the most sensitive, and the most curious of the old crow's offspring was dispatched with the sacred duty of assisting Hester in her work, to help balance the humors of the woodland, to draw upon its bounty for healing, to create wonder and inspiration where there was none. Those were the lifelong pursuits of the good witches and their companions. This mission the young crow gladly accepted. It was, after all, an honor. So it was that one morning soon after, when Hester had fed the crows their crumbs, and almost all of her avian visitors had taken wing and gone on their way, one remained behind, perching itself on a stool near her front door. It watched Hester, turning side to side with its shiny black head. Regarding it with a practiced eye, she knew her initiation to the world of wise women was complete. She and the crow would not be separated now. Hester and the crow grew in their wisdom and their friendship as the years went on. Just as her predecessor had noted, the young witch was ready to claim her position as the benevolent presence of the woodland. She had learned so many important lessons from the older woman, and the most important one of all was that the forest was her best teacher. Even as Hester continued the traditions of her mentor, she made her own discoveries, using secrets that she had learned from the whispering voice of nature. Here, far from the interference of humans, the ways of the old forest were at their most powerful. Hester occasionally took her remedies to town, offering relief to more than one ailing grandfather or feverish child. When people lost their direction in the forest, she found ways to silently help them find their footing again. When grieving hearts crossed her path, she tried her hardest to heal them. Through it all, she did everything in her power to protect her secret world and the animals who made it their home. In all of this, the crow was her main helpmate. It delivered messages, surveyed the land from the sky, and kept her apprised of goings-on in the forest. In this way, the seasons waxed and waned, and she and the crow grew older together. But there was one time of the year when the crow always left Hester to her own thoughts. On this evening, it would make an overnight pilgrimage to its flock, because the bird's family was its source of strength. At the time, many know as All Hallows' Eve, that moment when autumn reaches its most profound stillness and humans let loose their traditions to make sense of the dark that was the night that the crows would meet. At dusk on that day, when Hester had closed her door against the cold and sat rocking by her hearth, the crow would leave its perch and, with her blessing, vanish into the dark forest. It would caw jubilantly as it swiftly cut through the thick canopy and into the cloudy skies, rising up above the tops of the trees. It would flap its powerful jet-black wings, soaring confidently amid the deepening gloom. Underneath it, a million orange, yellow, red, and brown leaves whispered in unison. Some would be found clinging to their branches for one more hour or one more night. Others were already letting go to make their descent to the forest floor. Then, following an intuition as old as its lineage, the bird would glide to a special place where it knew its family would be found. Diving down against the wind, slicing deftly into the woods, it would gracefully alight on the crumbling stone wall of an abandoned house. This was a place so overgrown with ivy and trees, its paths so long obscured and erased, that it was quite forgotten by civilization. Any human memories were too long distant for it to be found by people. But the crows were still there, and what a flock they were, a convergence of many families known to each other for time out of mind, a group cemented by the great-great-great-grandparents of the birds who now gathered in this spot. Like a living manifestation of midnight, they gently descended upon the old stone ruin in an ebony blanket. Then, turning to greet each other, these crows of long acquaintance would begin exchanging their latest news. One elder of the flock might relate how she had soared high above the treetops for many miles, observing the little villages, each separated from the other, like an island in a sea of trees. She would marvel at the knowledge that these people could live their entire lives within their little towns in just this manner. Humans were so limited in their scope, she might say woefully. A younger, more daring crow would tell its brothers and sisters about the summer journey it had made to reach the edge of the forest and see the ocean. When the land-dwelling bird got there, it would have seen a vast stretch of glittering blue water and encountered many large white gulls. The gathered flock would chatter and exclaim at this wondrous story of faraway places. One very humorous member of the flock would probably tell a story of how he and some friends had alarmed people upon the road by throwing down nuts to crack upon the path under their feet. Then, while the people were gathering their wits, the crows might have banded together to snatch bread from their wagons. This story of foolish behavior would, of course, elicit mild disapproval from the older generation of birds who were listening in. One memorable year, Hester's crow shared the most amazing story of all. In service to its mistress, the faithful bird had tried to help a group of royal princes who had accidentally become enchanted and turned into swans. Unable to reverse the spell, Hester had asked her familiar to show their sister a method to break the enchantment. Alas, the crow related, the task she had taken on was to be a long one. The bird would have to keep watch over her for some time. In the years following, the crow would tell them how the story had ended with triumph and love. At this type of story, there was much expression of admiration among the gathered families. The role of a witch's familiar was a sacred and important one. The valiant efforts of one member of the family brought status to all the rest. When all the year's stories had been told and the greetings fully exchanged, the group always took flight together, rising in a heavy mass of feathers. The crows dispersed into the air once again, levitating above the trees and reshaping themselves into a dark mantle as the wispy clouds hid and then revealed the moon. The individuals in the sea of birds flapped their wild wings and headed across the thick carpet of trees, watching All Hallows' Eve unfold beneath them. Within the forest, the animals were alive to the oncoming chill of winter. They scurried and climbed, they burrowed and buried. They took in the peculiar mixture of dead leaves from the ground and wood smoke from the towns. They made haste to get ready for the oncoming lean season because they sensed it in the air. Soaring over the towns, the crows could observe the strange customs of the people below. There were bright, crackling bonfires to be seen lighting up the farms and the villages. Cakes and other harvest-time delights were being shared and celebrated. Costumes were being paraded about, partly to hide their wearers from evil spirits and partly to entertain their neighbors. Jack-o'-lanterns grinned their unapologetic and lopsided smiles, illuminating the darkness with their foolishness. All this the crows quietly observed from up high, under the cover of darkness, and in the midst of these revelries. They were invisible, masters of stealth, creatures of the deepest night, but also brothers and sisters, parents and children, and keepers of a tradition older than those that these villages knew. Just as the humans sensed the turning point in the year, so did the animals. It's just that the birds truly understood that the season's most profound purpose was to reconnect with those who came before and bring them full circle to those who were present. On this night, the flock came home to roost. When they had surveyed their forest territory and the night of All Hallows' Eve was waning, the crows always turned and moved homeward. The night would be quiet now as the human revelers disappeared behind their front doors. The towns extinguished their flames, and the villagers returned to their warm beds, dreaming of tricks and treats. In the forest, the nocturnal animals went about their usual tasks, hooting and scurrying, hunting and gathering. Then some years, the clouds pulled away, and with dawn imminent, the moon appeared briefly at her finest. The luminous glow from the sky might reflect on the waterways below, creating silvery veins that twisted through the sparser areas of the landscape. Looking down upon it, the crows would have a feeling of peace. All was as it should be in the world below. Soon one small family flock always began to break away at a time, heading off to their own resting place. Eventually, as the reunion dispersed, Hester's crow would smoothly diverge from the remaining birds and glide over the treetops in the direction of her cottage. When the journey ended, the bird would find the garden was still quiet. The crow would alight on the stool near her front door and rest. dawn would be at the moment when the sun was just beginning to paint the sky. The crow would watch as the heavens filled with all the pastels that heralded the daylight. Blues and grays seamlessly transitioned to yellow, orange, and pink. But with the day, there was a lingering sense of melancholy. The crow always felt that with the departure of night, the most secret places of the wilderness were temporarily lost. The cover of darkness was such a good friend to magic. But Hester did her best work in the sunlight. The crow's most earnest wish was to continue to help her in manifesting the good magic that followed her wherever she went. Until this time next year, the crow would dedicate itself to that task. And now, because these wild places must remain hidden, we will leave Hester and her crow at this point in the story to live their lives in peace. You must realize, of course, that it's never really at an end. For every enchanted prince or princess, for every distant kingdom, and for every quest, there is another deeper fairy tale underneath. The true current of magic doesn't end with a palace wedding or a broken spell. It is a river that never runs dry. And that tale will go on forever. 2. A Mermaid's Dreamy Tale, The Legend of Mara. Every legend and every fairy tale has some kernel of truth to it. The legend of Mara is no exception. Her story is a tale of finding one's place in the world. On the island that is now named after her, visitors flock to the shore to seek out the famed mystical watchtower where the legend is rumored to have begun. The tower is very old, and it is covered all over with drawings and etchings of tails, fins, flukes, and mermaids. No one knows how old this tower is, or who made these markings, but one thing is for sure. They say the tower is from the legend of Mara, the girl who helped the underwater world and was rewarded in turn with a gift that she just couldn't refuse. Mara was a young girl when she first felt the call of the ocean. She couldn't explain it. It was like some invisible force, some tether, physically pulled her towards the water's edge, where she'd stand mesmerized. More than any other feeling in the world, that tug was consistent. She simply believed it to be her wonder and joy at the majestic blue expanse of the ocean and her inexplicable love for swimming and exploring. Believing that every other child felt that same pull, Mara never really questioned it. She grew up in a small cottage in the southern isles of the continent and was raised by a local healer named Louise. Most of the time, Mara was content, and yet she always felt a little out of place, except when she was on the beach near the water, which called to her. She would feel that unseen tether pulling her to the shore at all hours of the day and night, and she would go. The water by the mysterious tower on the beach, it was set within the rocky cliffs that angled their way around the western side of the small island. Mara visited the secluded beach so many times as a child. Her guardian Louise chalked it up to a curiosity about nature, and so as Mara grew older, Louise granted her more and more freedom to explore. Every moment of that freedom saw Mara swimming in the waters by the tower, that otherworldly structure decorated in exquisite etchings of mermaids and underwater life. There weren't many children her age in the village, so Mara didn't have many friends. At times, she longed for companionship and adventure, but when she was at the beach or swimming in those sparkling cerulean waters, she felt like she was surrounded by things to explore. Sometimes she would comb the glittering expanse of sand for the rare and precious blue pearls that the island was known for. Nowhere else in the world had this kind of pearl. These pearls were larger than regular ones and so beautiful, shining in shades of aquamarine and sky blue, that they were rumored to be the most wondrous things in all the world, either on land or in the water. If you were lucky enough to find one and pick it up, you could spend hours gazing at its shimmering iridescence, a kind of flickering bluish-green light that shone so brightly it almost seemed as if it was lit up from within. It was said that real magic, the kind that made kingdoms quake and oceans roar, existed inside of those pearls. They must only exist in legend, Mara thought, as she had never seen one on any of her countless beach excursions. Neither had Louise, who had seen and done nearly everything that could be seen or done. Louise did have a few of the lesser pearls, the smaller, duller sisters to the magical ones. The healer used them in her poultices and tonics, as even they had healing properties. If Mara were to say anyone was truly her friend, she would say that Louise was, despite the age difference, or perhaps because of it. The two enjoyed their time together. Over the years, Louise had learned all of Mara's quirks. For example, the only kinds of food that Mara liked to eat were fresh vegetables, plants, or seafood. Louise always joked that Mara was more suited to living underwater than anywhere else. Night after night, Louise sat by her bedside, regaling her with amazing stories. It was Louise who told her of the mermaids of old, which were Mara's favorite tales of all. Perhaps it was those stories that instilled in Mara a belief in the creatures of the deep blue sea, the ones that were also etched on the ancient stone tower that she loved to explore. The ocean was vast, almost endless. Who knew what truly existed beneath the waves? It would be no surprise that these mermaids Louise spoke of loved, cared, wished, and dreamed just as the humans on land did. When she wasn't at the beach swimming or playing at the tower, Mara was at the healer's shop, helping Louise with the preparation of potions or tonics. She would often stay long into the evening to listen to every story the older woman shared with her. Mermaids weren't the only fantastical creatures Louise spoke of. There were also stories of fairies on land who communed with nature. Every plant, bird, and insect spoke to the fairies, keeping them apprised of all the happenings. The fairies even knew about Mara, Louise said with a wink, for they knew about everything and everyone. Those stories brought such wonder to Mara. Oh, how she yearned to see the fairies and mermaids for herself, to witness those stories come to life. She would often stay up long after dark, dreaming of such things, of becoming so attuned to nature that she could communicate with all of it. There was no doubt in her mind that these magical creatures existed and could do these amazing things that Louise spoke of. Everything just made more sense if they were real, Mara thought. To Mara, the healer's stories were more than just tall tales. When she heard them, they tugged at her just like when she felt that pull to the ocean. It was as though they were imbued with a magic of their own. She never dismissed those feelings. She was sure that there was something magical pulling that tether, and sometimes she even thought that she could hear whispers spoken to her whenever she was outside, especially near the beach. Mara knew deep down that one day her dreams would come true, that she would see those creatures of lore for herself. Her unwavering hope and belief kept her anchored in those dreams. According to the legend, those dreams came true the day Mara felt the most earnest tug she'd ever felt. As usual, it brought her to the water's edge by the tower. Mara had been helping Louise plant flowers in her garden when it happened. She put everything down and left, making her excuses to Louise, who smiled, yet said nothing. As the girl rushed across town towards the water, Mara was standing on the rocky shore, right by the tower when the moment she'd been waiting for finally arrived. She saw a girl's head slowly rise above the water's surface. But this was no ordinary girl. A swirl of purple, blue, and green hair pulled around her, and a set of bright emerald green eyes stared into her own. Without even having to see the similarly colored tail beneath the surface, Mara knew right then and there that this girl was a mermaid. Transfixed, Mara stared back until the mermaid waved her webbed hand, motioning for Mara to come towards her. Not wasting another moment, Mara splashed into the water and swam right for the creature, her excitement a tangible thing. Upon reaching the mermaid, it was all Mara could do not to stare at her beauty. She was so stunning. The mermaid opened her mouth to speak to Mara, only for a stream of garbled sounds to pour out. As Mara raised an eyebrow, clearly not understanding, the mermaid sighed and then signaled for her to duck underwater. It was one thing to meet a real mermaid, but what happened next was even more extraordinary. The beautiful, ethereal mermaid brushed Mara's forehead with her fingertip. The second her smooth hand touched the girl's skin, there was a flash of green that pierced through the darkness of the water. And then, all of a sudden, Mara could see and hear everything, and she could breathe underwater. Her surprise and joy must have been evident. The mermaid grinned as she introduced herself as Vera. Mara could only glance around in awe at her surroundings, at the now crystal clear water. She could see far into the distance and far below her. Each and every detail was rendered infinitely clearer and more nuanced. She could see every sliver of sunlight dancing through the water, each individual scale of every fish in sight, and the myriad glittering blue-green scales of Vera's tail. She was mesmerized by the way every flicker of movement sent shafts of iridescence into the water, and Vera's voice was a symphony of sound, traveling effortlessly through the water. It was simply astounding, more magical than anything Mara had imagined. Even in her wildest dreams, Vera waited for a moment, giving Mara time to take in her heightened senses and adjust to the changes. Then she took the girl's hand in her own and asked her for help. She explained that Mara had been summoned here to the underwater kingdom, the world of the mermaids, for a reason. Vera told Mara that she was special. She could hear the call of the deep. That was why she had been chosen for this quest. And that also explained why Mara had always felt that inexplicable pull to the water. Mara listened wide-eyed as Vera began to recount the story of the Mermaid Queen. The queen had lost a sacred heirloom. It was a string of blue pearls, the same pearls that Mara had heard about in stories. The queen treasured this magical necklace, having worn it her whole life. It was priceless, and it had been missing for a while now. At last, the queen had asked for help. She asked Vera to send out a call through the water and over the land. The mermaids knew that only those who loved the ocean and believed in the existence of their species could succeed in getting the necklace back. The call for help had gone out, said Vera, and now here they were. Mara was the only one who had shown up without a trace of fear or trepidation, and with only wonder and bravery in her heart. Should the girl complete the task and help the Mermaid Queen, a generous reward would await her. Mara was amazed at this turn of events. It was a quest, a real-life quest. She could hardly believe that she had been chosen for such an honor. She squeezed Vera's hand and beamed at her, telling her that of course she would help the mermaids. Besides, she knew the island like the back of her hand. Vera hugged Mara's neck, her tail swishing through the water as she wrapped around the girl in an embrace. Then she pulled back and opened her hand to reveal the most beautiful thing Mara had ever seen. A real blue pearl. It was smaller than what she'd imagined after hearing all the stories. Vera told her that the blue pearl possessed enough inherent magic to aid Mara in her task. Handing the pearl to Mara, Vera explained that it would help lead her to the necklace. Like calls to like, she said, as is the way of all things. Mara clung to the pearl and nodded, telling the mermaid that she would do her best. After retrieving the pearl, said Vera, Mara should go to the tower on the shore. By the base of the tower was a small niche in which a bell hung. It had always been ignored, viewed as part of the tower's enigma, but Mara learned that it was there for a reason. The mermaids would hear the bell, and Vera would know to come for her. The two embraced again, and Vera once more extended out her palm to rest on Mara's forehead, removing her magic so that Mara could return to the land and begin her quest. As Mara felt the magic leave her body and her senses return to normal, she swam to the shore. When she reached it, she waded through the surf, all the while gazing intently at the blue pearl in her hand. It was faintly pulsing with power. Mara plopped down on the sand so she could dry off a bit before beginning her search for the blue pearl necklace. The whole experience felt surreal, yet it also felt so right, as if she had been made for this very thing in this moment of time. She couldn't think of a greater honor than to help the mermaids, and so, with the rest of the day ahead of her, she got to her feet, clutching the pearl tight in her hand. She began her search. She wasn't quite sure how the magic and the pearls worked, but she could feel the power of the one in her hand, and she assumed that it would increase the closer she got to the necklace. Mara decided that the best course of action would be to try different directions and see which produced the most intense reaction from the pearl. Choosing to go north first, she started to walk towards the center of town. The longer she walked, the less the pearl seemed to throb. Taking that as an answer, Mara then retraced her steps, and this time chose to go east. East took her along the rocky shore of the beach, and it didn't take much time at all for her to feel the deep decrease in the power of the pearl. Retracing her steps once again, and considering that south would lead her right back into the water, she then went west, past the tower by the cliffs, and sure enough, the pearl began to throb and hum in her hand, its intensity growing by the second. Delighted to be heading in the right direction, Mara sang a jaunty tune while she walked. By now, the sun was hanging high in the bright blue sky. She passed by beachside cottages and brilliant green clusters of palm trees, stopping to eat some of the delicate fruit. It tasted so sweet and juicy. Resuming her walk, it wasn't long before the pearl grew so hot and hummed so loud in her hand that she knew she had arrived at the place where the necklace must be. The area was a small grove of trees, a little way inland with ample shade. Mara began to comb the area, keeping her eyes peeled for that telltale glimmer of iridescent aquamarine which would match the color of the pearl she carried with her. She shuffled through the brush and looked along every inch of ground. She circled every tree and searched every nook and cranny, but it wasn't until she turned her face up to look higher into the trees that she saw it, something shimmering in a bird's nest in a tree close to her. When she got closer, she realized that the necklace was draped over the nest. It had obviously been taken by magpies, who were notorious for being treasure seekers. It made perfect sense, and thankfully, the family of birds weren't home, so she could easily retrieve the precious item. Scanning the tree, she found that there were several branches she could use to hoist herself up and climb to the nest. Mara put the pearl in her pocket. Then she took a running jump to grab onto the lowest branch, swinging herself up and onto it. Good thing she was nimble, she thought, as she surveyed the branch above. She scurried up the tree quickly. Soon she was within reach of the nest. With trembling hands, she reached out and gently pried the necklace from the magpie's nest. Vera had told her of the necklace's beauty, but there were no words for just how beautiful the string of blue pearls really was, and the magic it contained was impossible to ignore. It absolutely radiated power, and it shone so bright that it was almost hard to look at. Mara didn't waste any time in slipping the necklace over her head as she shimmied down the tree jumping from the last branch to land on the ground. Her knees shook a little, but she remained upright. She touched the necklace one last time, savoring the thrill of power she felt, before she set off for the beach. Reaching the tower, Mara began to circle it, looking for the niche. When she found it, she stuck her hand in and rang the bell just once, knowing that this was all that was needed. Then she went down to the shore and waited. It was only a matter of moments before Vera's head popped up out of the water. Mara made her way through the surf and swam to reach the mermaid. The second she did, she followed the same steps as before, going under and letting Vera place her palm on her forehead so that she could breathe and speak to her. Mara excitedly handed Vera the glorious necklace as she told the tale of how and where she found it. All Vera could do was shake her head in amazement. Mara had brought back the most precious object in the mermaid kingdom. They were all so grateful, said Vera. The only gift that the queen could think to give her was one that made Mara's eyes go wide. Vera explained that the queen was offering the girl the gift of a lifetime, to become a mermaid herself if she so desired. It took Mara all of a second to respond. Yes, she said. Yes, to live underwater, to become a mermaid. Mara couldn't wish for anything more. She accepted the offer then and there and gained her stunning mermaid tail that very moment. It is said that Mara found her people, the mer people, that is, underwater. She finally found her home that day. That is the legend of Mara, the legend of a mere mortal, a human being, helping a kingdom and becoming a mermaid herself. It is a story of finding one's place in the world through the power of belief in magic and things unseen. 3. The Astronomer. Once there lived an astronomer who was mesmerized by the night sky. He would stay awake all night, admiring the constellations sparkling in the darkness overhead. He lived in a small village in ancient Greece, where the mountains climbed up from the sea. The hillside was dotted with small houses, which formed a constellation of their own. But although he lived in a wonderful place, he had a singular passion. Once he was awakened to the beauty of the night sky, it wasn't long before the astronomer cared for nothing else. The astronomer lived in a squat white house, adorned simply with a bed, dresser, desk, and chair. He didn't need much else, because all he did in the house was sleep and record the constellations while sitting at his desk. He had no need for a table or chairs for guests, as he rarely entertained a single friend or relative. He had no time for such things when there was always more of the night sky to discover. What wonders must still lie above to help people navigate, tell the time, and read the seasons, he thought. In his dreams, all he saw were the stars. He wished he could float into space to get a better look at the pinpricks of light that made up his life's work. The little corner of Greece where he lived was blessed with clear skies, and the astronomer wanted to discover as much of them as he could. Each night, he wandered further from the village, feet pacing over the rocky ground to see the stars from different viewpoints. In the village, the townspeople farmed, gardened, and fished every day. All who lived there knew everything about everyone else, and so the astronomer felt there was much more possibility in the heavens. Wanting to take full advantage of his nighttime strolls, the astronomer slept in the hot afternoon while his friends and family enjoyed long meals together. At night, while they slumbered, he wandered the fields alone, climbing rolling hills and strolling on rocky paths, always gazing skyward. As dawn broke and the rest of the village was waking up, the astronomer would tuck himself away in the privacy of his home and write down his observations from the night before. Then he'd drift off to sleep, dreaming of the night ahead. He was so consumed by the world of galaxies, planets, and celestial bodies. All the most exciting things, the astronomer thought, happened at night. During the day, light illuminated all. But when the night sky took over, so much remained a mystery. It was a challenge to learn about it all. He watched the seasons pass through the stars, the landscape changing around him while he slept. Since he only went out at night, the astronomer never noticed the blooming of new flowers in spring or the sweet earthy scent of autumn. Someone else had already learned all there was to know about everything on land, he thought. What hid in the night sky was untapped potential, secrets, and unanswered questions. The astronomer watched Artemis's hunt in the stars. He sought the gods of Olympus in the constellations. Sometimes, under the glint of the moon, he would visit the temple of Artemis to pay tribute to the beauty shining in the sky above. The temple in his village had an open roof, which was perfect for stargazing. He barely noticed the architect's marble columns or carved statues, as he only cared for the creations above. One night, the astronomer was out for his walk, gazing up at the stars as he always did. He was admiring the way the Big and Little Dipper fit perfectly together, not looking where he was going. He tripped over a log and found himself tangled in his robes on the ground. His neighbor happened to hear the commotion and came out to see what had happened. The astronomer chuckled at his clumsiness and gathered himself together as the neighbor helped him to his feet. He said, "My friend, why do you spend so much time looking at the stars when you fail to see what is right in front of you?" The astronomer laughed. He thought of the beauty in the stars and the night sky, the joy of gazing at worlds so far away from his own. But perhaps his neighbor was right. Maybe he spent too much time looking up at the sky and not enough time enjoying what was given to him on Earth. The astronomer returned home and, for the first time since he was a child, fell asleep at night. He awoke in the morning to the town coming alive. The sounds of laughter and quiet chatter rolled in the warm breeze outside. At first, the astronomer felt gloomy. What had he missed in the heavens last night? But then, as he dressed and went outside, his smile slowly grew. The same neighbor who had helped him the night before invited him over for breakfast. There was delicious, soft, crusty bread crisp on the outside and doughy on the inside, along with hard cheeses and a warm mug of strong coffee. How long had it been since the astronomer had eaten freshly baked bread or enjoyed a mug of coffee shared with a friend? As they sat and sipped their coffee around the outdoor table, the astronomer told the neighbor's wife what had happened the night before. When they were finished, the couple decided to accompany him on a walk around the village. They were determined to help him experience everything they loved about their hometown. They set off together to walk down the lane. "Doesn't the soft earth feel wonderful beneath your feet?" they asked him. "Can you smell the fresh bread and coffee all the other villagers are enjoying this morning?" The astronomer's senses were delighted by the aroma of breakfast, and he noticed how the earth was slightly soft, but still firm beneath his feet, cushioning each step he took. In all the hours he had spent wandering, he'd never realized how wonderful it could be. If he had paid so much attention to the ground the night before, perhaps he never would have tripped. They walked past a woman selling fruit from a little stand. "I haven't seen you in a while," the fruit seller called to the astronomer, waving him over. "Let's share some fresh juice together." She squeezed oranges into a cup. They let off the delicate and enticing floral scent of orange blossoms. When he took his first sip, the cool, sweet taste of the juice filled his mouth. "Yes, the stars at night are beautiful, but you can't drink the stars," he mused to himself. In that moment, the astronomer thought the glittering constellations only looked half as sweet as this earthly delight. When the neighbors told the fruit seller of their mission to help him see the beauty of the town, she said they must go and visit her niece's garden, for if you were enjoying the wonders on earth, that was the best place in town to do so. "I'll show you the way," she said, closing up her stall in favor of a new adventure. As they walked down the lane, more and more of their neighbors came out to join them. They weren't used to seeing the astronomer out and about during the day, so they each had a spot they wanted to show him. The astronomer couldn't remember the last time he'd been around so many people. He had opted for the quiet of night rather than the noises of daytime, but now that he was truly listening, he could hear the music in his friends' voices. When the group arrived at the niece's garden, she welcomed them with open arms. "What an honor to have the great astronomer in my garden for the very first time," she said with a smile. Together, he and the townspeople admired the flowers. The niece pointed to a bunch of red blooms growing around a wooden archway. "These are special wildflowers created by Aphrodite," she told him. The astronomer stood under the arch, admiring the red and green mixing with the brown wood overhead. The flowers smelled piney and a little sweet. He enjoyed them immensely. Next, they looked at a patch of beautiful purple irises. When the astronomer peered at them closely, he could see the white circles surrounding the yellow center that gave the flower its distinctive name. They gazed at orange lilies and white orchids, immersing themselves in the fresh and fragrant air of the garden. When it was time to leave, the niece decided to join the rest of her neighbors on their walk around the village. Watching the astronomer experiencing these pleasures for the first time was reminding everyone just how wonderful life on Earth could be. The astronomer strolled in the middle of the group as they left the center of the village and continued down the road to the Temple of Apollo. The pillars of the temple glittered in the sunlight. The astronomer noticed the change underfoot as he stepped from the dirt path to the temple's marble floor. The heat of the day was growing, and he appreciated the cool ground beneath him and the roof above. It was quite different from the temple of Artemis, he thought. He took a moment to stand still, his feet pressed into the marble, and a gentle breeze wound its way through the pillars, keeping him cool in the shade of the temple. The other townspeople around him explored the building, admiring the statues and carvings on the walls. He enjoyed the feeling of staying still while the world moved around him. Perhaps he need not always be in motion, he thought. Sometimes it was best to take a break from work and study and just enjoy existing in the moment. When he was ready, he walked slowly around the walls of the temple, admiring the details the great artists and architects had embedded into this special place, which was used for community gatherings and for paying homage to the gods. When the sun rose higher in the sky, the group left the temple and gathered in the shaded village square for lunch. They each shared what they had: soft cheeses, leftover bread from the morning, roasted barley, and juicy olives. The astronomer relished each burst of flavor in his mouth. Before, he had hurried through meals, stealing bites in between long periods of stargazing. Now he appreciated taking the time to savor these delicious foods. How have I never taken the time to really experience this before? He wondered. He ate slowly, enjoying the sweet and salty tastes intermingled on his tongue, and noticing how the crunchy barley and soft cheese complemented each other perfectly. When they'd finished the main course, the fruit seller fetched a basket of her produce for dessert. The villagers drizzled the different fruits with honey, making them even sweeter and more decadent. The astronomer took a bite of each, delighting in the rich flavors. After the meal, the people lazily walked back to their homes for a nap. They waved goodbye to each other and promised to visit again soon. Sleep during the day was one thing the astronomer was used to, but when he got home and lay down on his bed, he couldn't fall asleep. Instead, he paid attention to the soft sound of his breath moving in and out of his body. He listened to the gentle twittering of birds outside, accompanied by the soft buzzing of bees. Through the open window, he smelled the flowers in the garden. A light gust of wind brought in all the delightful aromas of herbs, spices, and greenery. He lay there, resting his body and using his senses to immerse himself in the world around him. As the sun drifted lower in the sky, the astronomer heard a knock at the door. His neighbors had come to fetch him. There was one more thing they wanted to show him this evening. Together, they walked the winding path up the mountain next to the village. The path was narrower here, and the parade of townsfolk carried blankets and baskets on their heads. The evening breeze rustled the shrubs around them, and birds followed along above, wondering where the procession of villagers was going. The astronomer watched the clicking heels of the woman in front of him and heard the footsteps of the man behind. His senses felt alive and heightened in a way he had never experienced before, even at night. When they reached a plateau, they spread out the blankets and unpacked the food. Looking around, he realized everyone had brought all of the finest things in their pantries. The farmer took out fresh vegetables and meats. The fisherman unpacked salted herring and calamari. Boiled eggs were sliced and passed around, and everyone shared wine from an ornate glass jug. The people talked and laughed, but the astronomer sat in silence, taking everything in. He listened to the stories of his new friends' lives that he had so often ignored before. He saw the way the trees swayed in the wind, casting shadows on the rocks dotting the mountainside. He could see the village below and the peak of the mountain above, and he enjoyed the aromas of all the different foods the people had lovingly prepared. Soon, the sun began to paint the sky in vibrant hues. In all the time the astronomer had sought the stars, he had never before appreciated their opening act. He had always waited for the sunset to finish and night to fall. But now that he had slowed down, he could admire each shade of yellow, pink, red, and purple as the sun lowered itself sleepily behind the mountain's peak. When the final rays of sun disappeared beneath the horizon, the villagers packed up the remaining food and folded the blankets, ready to go home for the night. But the astronomer stopped them. "Now I have something to show you," he said. His friends unfolded their blankets and lay down on the soft earth, watching the sky grow dark overhead. Glittering white and yellow stars began to poke through the darkness, delighting the villagers watching from below. The astronomer had seen the stars many times before, but he'd never noticed how their bright light brought out the shadows of the trees and heightened the contrast of the ground below. He lay back on his blanket, admiring each constellation as it revealed itself one by one. He pointed them out to the villagers, who were appreciative to be sharing in his knowledge. "I understand why you like to walk at night, but isn't it also wonderful to be still under the stars?" his neighbor asked him. The astronomer nodded his head in agreement. He didn't always have to be searching for something new when so much beauty revealed itself around him every night. He wanted to fully take it in, not rush to discover the next thing. As they lay there stargazing, the villagers felt their eyelids growing heavy. They began to yawn, and they knew it was time to pack up their things and go home to bed. In a slow and careful line, they tiptoed down the mountain. The astronomer felt the path beneath his feet, noticing each pebble or twig he passed over. The stars illuminated the way home, and as they walked, the villagers whispered of all they'd seen in the sky above. When they reached the village square, all the townspeople waved goodbye, one after another. They retreated into their homes, finding cozy spots on soft mattresses and under warm blankets. The astronomer too went back to his house, But instead of crawling into bed, he brought a pillow and blanket outside. He laid them down on a soft patch of grass and rested his head on the pillow. Tonight, he would dream of stars again, but this time he would fully realize their beauty. He slowly let his eyes close as the light breeze and gentle hooting of owls lulled him to sleep under the glorious night sky. Ala 4, Poseidon's Quest, Parts 1 and 2 combined. As a travel writer, Ben was used to moving around. He'd been all over the world, but this summer, he was going to a place that he'd wanted to visit for a long time, and he couldn't wait to get there. Ben specialized in writing about beaches, as these were his favorite spots. On this trip, he would be flying to Spain, one of the countries with the best beaches in the world. After doing a lot of research, Ben had decided to visit Mallorca, the largest of Spain's Balearic Islands, which are located in the Mediterranean. Here he would stay in Porto Cristo, a small fishing village on the eastern coast. Ben was a great swimmer, and he enjoyed diving as well. Porto Cristo seemed to have some nice diving areas, which was what attracted him in the first place. When Ben finally boarded the plane, he could barely contain his excitement. As the airplane reached its cruising altitude, he opened the window shade and watched the clouds. The plane was flying smoothly, and the clouds looked like white, fluffy cotton. Moving through the clouds reminded Ben of how he felt when he was floating in the water. He felt the same kind of lightness, like he didn't weigh a thing. For a while, he watched the changing shapes of the clouds and imagined that he was a small light bird crossing the sky. He felt a sense of freedom, imagining that he could go anywhere in the world just by flapping his wings. As he imagined this, Ben felt his body becoming even lighter. When he pictured the bird's wings moving effortlessly, his own arms and legs felt particularly light and relaxed. Relaxation finally took over his whole body, and when his eyelids fell under the spell, he calmly drifted into sleep. Some hours later, Ben was woken up by a voice coming through the airplane speakers. They were about to land. Ben fastened his seatbelt and rubbed his eyes. Through the window, he saw pieces of land that seemed to float atop the blue sea. As the plane approached the ground, the islands became clearer. Ben could see flashes of green, brown, and ivory as the trees, plants, and rock formations grew in size and detail. He was already imagining all the things that he would do once he landed. His mind and heart were filled with excitement. A little while later, Ben got on the bus to Porto Cristo, and after a relaxing 2-hour journey, he arrived at his hotel room. Ben was pleased to see that the room was clean and neat. The colors were a combination of white, light browns, and light blues. The bed had just been made. Ben lay down and took a deep breath. The air smelled nice and fresh, and the pillows and sheets were very comfortable. The room was not that big, but it was extremely cozy. It felt like his own personal nest. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly and deeply as he began to unwind. As he was relaxing on the bed, he felt a breeze on his feet. It was coming from a sliding door. Ben got up and stepped outside on the balcony. He caught his first glimpse of the gorgeous hotel pool. It was huge. Breathing in, he noticed that the air was salty and tasted like the ocean. As he took in the beach scent and the view of the pool, he wanted to be at the seaside right away. He got ready and left the hotel. Once Ben was outside, the salt in the air was more evident. The breeze carried the essence of the ocean throughout the town. Ben could imagine tiny grains of sand getting tangled in his hair as it was combed by the light wind. It was about 4 in the afternoon, and the sun was just right. It was bright, but not so hot anymore. Ben felt the comforting warmth of the sun's rays as he made his way down to the beach. The sand was fine and smooth. Walking barefoot felt like being massaged by tiny beads. The water was a clear shade of blue, and some areas even shimmered turquoise under the sunlight. The ocean looked like an infinite pool of freshness and beauty. Admiring the view in front of him, Ben felt deeply relaxed. As he let the water wash over his feet, he could feel a wave of calm rising through his body. The moment felt so peaceful, he wanted to stay there forever. At last, Ben continued to make his way through the shallows. He walked slowly as the small waves lapped over his feet. Then, all of a sudden, Ben felt a slight tremor in the ground beneath him. Though it only lasted for a few seconds, he was sure that there was something unusual about the tremor, maybe even something magical, though perhaps it was just his imagination. But then he saw something peculiar out of the corner of his eye. It looked like a golden stick flying past him. Now Ben was convinced that something strange was going on. As he squinted and looked around, trying to find where the stick had come from, he noticed something else. A few meters ahead, the water was moving, and these weren't ordinary waves. Curious to see what was happening, Ben moved towards the strange waves, and then, when he was almost there, he saw a man emerging from the water. Before Ben could come any closer, the stranger raised his hand in a commanding gesture, telling him to stop. The man had a peculiar look. He was middle-aged, muscular, and taller than average, and he had a long, tangled beard. A moment later, the man went underwater. Ben could see the surface churning vigorously. He wanted to get a closer look and see what was going on, but remembering the man's gesture, he continued to keep his distance. After a few seconds, the water began to settle. When it was completely still, the man emerged again and signaled to Ben to come closer. Ben walked forward, and as the sea became gradually deeper, he had to swim to reach the stranger. The water around the man was tranquil, and it also looked somewhat different, like it was glowing slightly. There seemed to be actual ripples forming and vibrating around his presence. Perhaps Ben's eyes were playing a trick on him. But before he could decide, the stranger spoke to him. "I'm in need of your help, young man," the stranger said. His eyes were the color of the ocean. They seemed calm like the surrounding waters, but his expression looked troubled. "A very important possession of mine has gone missing," the man continued, "and I need you to help me find it. It is my golden trident, my most powerful protection against sea monsters." At first, Ben thought that this was a joke, but then he remembered the golden stick that he had seen flying past him. He asked the stranger why he owned a trident. The man looked him in the eye and replied, "I am Poseidon, god of the sea." Ben gaped in amazement. Here, standing right in front of him, was a man who claimed to be a Greek god. Poseidon explained that as the god of the sea, he had command over water. Every sea creature obeyed him. To prove this, he raised his right arm. As he did this, a column of water emerged from the ocean. Then Poseidon moved his arm in a circular motion. The column followed his movements, and the water formed a ring. When he stopped moving his arm, a perfect hoop of water was floating above the sea. Ben gasped, but that wasn't all. Poseidon then made a peculiar sound. A couple of seconds later, Ben spotted a fin emerging from the water a few meters out. It was a dolphin. The dolphin swam fast, and when it was next to Poseidon, it leaped into the air and through the water hoop. It then remained by Poseidon's side as though greeting an old friend. As Poseidon stroked the dolphin's head, he explained what it meant to be the god of the sea. One of his duties was to protect people from sea monsters. He had just finished dealing with a group of them. Unfortunately, during this encounter, the trident had flown out of his grasp. Poseidon couldn't leave this spot because he had to keep an eye out for more. Besides, there were also other important tasks that he needed to take care of in the water. His work as god of the sea kept him busy. This was why he needed Ben's help to find his trident. For a moment, Ben was speechless. The man really was Poseidon, the ancient god of myth and legend. He remembered what he'd seen earlier, a golden stick flying in the air. When he mentioned this, Poseidon nodded. Whenever the trident wasn't in his hands, it turned into a golden staff that almost looked like a regular stick. The god seemed thoughtful as he looked at Ben. Then he asked, "What is your name, young man?" Ben replied that his name was Benjamin, or Ben to his friends. Poseidon smiled and said, "Ben, I can offer you something in return for your help. It will be of great value for your work and travels. There is a magical parchment that contains a map of this whole planet and its waters. You just need to tap on the specific water that you want to visit, and it will take you there in an instant." Poseidon put his hand in the sea and pulled out the magical map. He told Ben to place the tip of his right index finger wherever he wanted to go. Ben had been to Hawaii several times, so he thought it would be an easy place to confirm the parchment's powers. He carefully tapped his finger on the shores of Honolulu. In an instant, Ben felt his body being smoothly transported to the turquoise waters he knew so well. He had been there so many times that the landscape was unmistakable. Golden sand, palm trees, the rise and fall of lush hills in the distance. Completely awestruck, Ben realized that Poseidon was telling the truth about the parchment. It really did have magical powers. After tapping the map once again, Ben found himself instantly transported back to the beach at Porto Cristo. The journey was so quick and smooth, it was as though he'd never left. Ben thanked Poseidon for offering him this exceptionally valuable gift. It would be so useful for his future travels. And of course, he agreed to help Poseidon with his search for the trident. The god of the sea explained that Ben wouldn't have to do it alone. Because of the importance of the mission, he would be helped by a special creature. Her name was Crystal. She was a fish when she was in the water, but turned into a bright firefly when she was in the air. Poseidon explained that Crystal had a special talent for finding precious objects. She would let Ben know where to look for the trident, and she wouldn't stop until they found it. In that moment, a beautiful fish appeared in the water. She was as clear as the ocean, but she also had touches of emerald green and turquoise blue on her scales and fins. Somehow, she even glowed in the water. The beauty of her fish form was hypnotizing. As Crystal rose to the surface and came out of the water, she swiftly transformed into a mesmerizing firefly. Her wings were thin but strong at the same time. She could fly high and fast, and the most beautiful part of her was the light that she emitted. It was bright but not dazzling. It was a warm and reassuring glow that made Ben feel like he wasn't alone on this journey. He sensed that Crystal was more powerful than she looked, and he knew in his heart that he would be safe if he followed her magnificent colors wherever she went. Ben walked back toward the shore with Crystal flying by his side. When they got to the beach, Crystal flew quickly to the far end and hovered in midair. This was where they had to start looking for the trident. But with everything that had happened this afternoon, Ben was starting to feel tired. He just needed a second of rest. He lay down on the beach and felt his head and neck sinking into the warm sand. Then his back, his arms, and then his legs and feet. The sand molded to the shape of his body. Even the smallest grain of sand seemed to be massaging his tired muscles. Ben took a deep breath in and let the fresh and salty ocean breeze fill his lungs. As he exhaled, he imagined all the tiredness leaving his body. Crystal came toward him, her firefly wings shining in the sunlight. She seemed to understand that he needed a brief moment of rest. She flew over his forehead and hovered there, glowing warmly and calmly. Ben could feel the glow spreading through his face and head. There was something special about Crystal's glow. It made him feel like every thought was leaving his mind as it filled with pure relaxation. Ben breathed slowly and deeply, feeling completely at ease. Next, Crystal hovered over Ben's stomach. His belly was rumbling, and she could tell that he was hungry. But somehow, she managed to create a blanket of warm glow that covered his stomach. While she did this, Ben's mind was filled with images of his favorite food. They felt so real that he could taste delicious fruit on his tongue, and his belly was starting to feel full. Just as he was beginning to feel thirsty, a fresh river of water seemed to flow through his throat and body. Ben felt so relaxed now that he wasn't tired, hungry, or thirsty. He didn't know how, but thanks to Crystal, he was feeling completely rejuvenated. Ben took a deep breath as he slowly got to his feet. When he thanked Crystal, she almost seemed to have understood him as her wings glowed more brightly. Feeling ready to walk on, Ben continued along the beach with Crystal leading the way. Ben was wearing sandals, and with each step, he could feel the smooth sand moving through his toes. After walking a little further along the shore, Ben followed Crystal into a dense area of trees and other plants. As he stepped into the shade, he noted how dark it was inside the grove. He couldn't see much at first, but this almost didn't matter to him. The little forest was full of herbal scents. Ben felt like he was swimming in a warm cup of calming tea. Closing his eyes, he breathed in deeply. He didn't want to miss any of those soothing scents. When he opened his eyes, he saw that Crystal was glowing brighter than ever. Feeling calm and relaxed, he followed the magical firefly as she made her way through the woods. Ben and Crystal carefully looked for the golden staff in the sand and in the lower plants and bushes. Then they searched the taller trees like the live oaks and palms. Crystal flew to the highest parts and moved through the branches while Ben searched from the ground. Sometimes he would climb a tree as high as he could and look for the trident there. But there was nothing to find, not a single shimmer of gold. As they left the wooded area, Ben glanced at his watch and saw that it was already around 2 in the morning. Perhaps it would be best to take a small break to sleep. But then he realized that his hotel room was too far away from the beach. He didn't want to waste time going all the way back. Just as he was wondering what to do next, Crystal started glowing and flew along the shore. Ben followed her into a small cave next to the beach. As he looked around, he understood why she had brought him here. It was the perfect place to rest for a few hours. As he lay down on the sand and Crystal emitted her warmest light yet, Ben didn't feel cold at all inside the cave. It was warm and cozy. The sand was as comfortable as a bed, and he could feel Crystal's glow blanketing him, just like the soft sheets in his hotel room. After a good night's rest, Ben would be ready to continue his search for the trident. But right now, he was so tired that he could think of nothing but sleep. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath in. His breathing gradually settled into a natural rhythm, just like the waves of the ocean, and soon he was fast asleep. Ben woke up slowly. He could feel the sensation of wings brushing his skin. When he opened his eyes, he saw Crystal flying above him in the form of a glowing firefly. The space was gradually filling with light. From this spot near the cave entrance, Ben could see that the sun was rising. It was time to wake up. To Ben's surprise, He felt very well rested and ready to continue yesterday's search for Poseidon's trident. When Crystal flew out of the cave, Ben got up and followed. As he stepped outside, he saw that the sun wasn't fully risen yet. Its edges were touching the water, covering it with soft golden shimmers. The sky looked like a canvas that had been painted from bottom to top. Near the horizon, the sun's golden glow resembled orange paintbrush strokes. Orange then transitioned to a light yellow, followed by a soft blue. The top part of the sky was like a painting made of deep blue strokes. It was a beautiful sunrise, and it filled Ben with the hope that comes with the start of a new day. He felt so calm that he stood there for a moment, admiring the view. Ben also noticed that he was surrounded by a pleasing symphony of birds chirping and distant waves rising and falling. As he enjoyed this relaxing soundscape, he took a deep breath in. The early morning scent of the beach filled his lungs. He closed his eyes, savoring the calming atmosphere. A moment later, Crystal was back at Ben's side, fluttering eagerly. From her movements, Ben understood that he had to follow her. Crystal guided him to a spot under the trees. The ground was covered with fresh fruit. There were piles of apricots, oranges, and grapes, as well as a big watermelon. Ben's eyes lit up. He thanked Crystal and began to eat. Each bite of fruit seemed to melt in his mouth. The apricots were deliciously sweet. The oranges were the juiciest ones he had ever tasted. Then there were the grapes, so soft and sweet, and the big watermelon, which was juicy and refreshing. The strong scent of all the fruits made them taste even better. It wasn't just a breakfast, but a banquet. When he had finished, Crystal started flying toward the sea. At first, Ben was puzzled. He didn't understand what she wanted. Then, Crystal went into the water and transformed into her other form, a gorgeous fish. Ben walked towards the shallows and kept following Crystal. The little fish had started glowing with wavy rays emanating from her body. Once he was deep enough, Ben put his face underwater, hoping that he would be able to understand Crystal a little better like this. What he saw below the surface was amazing. Crystal's colors were even more vibrant underwater. She was captivating. Ben gazed at the shades of sparkling blue and green in astonishment. But then he saw something even more magnificent. The rays of light that were coming from her body were also glowing, and they pointed in different directions. At last, Ben understood. Crystal wanted them to explore those different areas of the ocean. But for that, he would need diving gear. Fortunately, he remembered that he'd seen a diving school not so far from the shore. Without delay, Ben rented all the equipment that he needed, and in no time, he was back at the ocean where Crystal was floating near the surface. They were ready to begin their search for the trident. Ben touched one of Crystal's glowing rays to show which direction he thought they should go first, and right away they were both transported to another spot in the ocean. It was just like Poseidon's magical map with its powers of teleportation. Ben could see that they were now far from the shore, but he was a trained diver, so he felt comfortable and safe being there. In addition, these waters were particularly clear and they offered good visibility. As Ben and Crystal dived to the depths of this area, the light became dimmer, but they could still see their surroundings well thanks to the bright rays of sunlight that penetrated the water. Diving deeper, they came across several marine species such as eels, tuna, and damselfish. There was even an octopus which moved its tentacles in such a graceful way. The suction cups that covered the tentacles looked like pearls. Oh, what an elegant creature, Ben thought. As they got deeper, Ben and Crystal found bright pink coral reefs. Their detailed patterns and structures made them look like architecture or a work of art. It was here that Ben discovered his favorite creature, the nudibranch, also commonly known as sea slugs. He loved their beautiful mix of exotic and vivid colors. His favorite nudibranch looked like something painted by a famous artist. It was lime green with canary yellow dots. Its head was decorated with large light blue spots surrounded by yellow rings. Although Ben went diving frequently, all the beauty that he saw underwater took his breath away. He experienced this sense of awe every time. Ben stared at this coral reef and its sea slugs for a while, contemplating the wonders of nature. It was only when Crystal approached him that he remembered what they were there for. Ben started looking through the reefs, but found nothing. They even dived to the very bottom of the area, but when he dug through the sand, Ben couldn't see any sign of the golden trident at all. Crystal then emitted a new glowing ray. When Ben touched it, he found himself suddenly transported to the entrance of an underwater cavern. The smooth teleportation still felt surreal, but he was getting used to it by now. The underwater cavern had wide holes where he could enter and explore. Small, colorful fish swam around this area in groups. Ben swam slowly so as not to startle them. Once he was inside the cavern, he started looking around. First, he slid his hands across the walls, both inside and outside. Then, he dived to the bottom of the cavern and dug through the sand. But again, there was no trident to be found. Crystal swam towards him and emitted yet another glowing ray. After touching it, Ben was surprised to find himself sitting on the beach. Crystal had turned back into a firefly, but instead of guiding Ben to the next spot, she just hovered beside him, fluttering in midair. Perhaps she was thinking about where to search next. In the meantime, Ben took off the diving gear. Just as he had finished, Crystal started fluttering in front of him, glowing intermittently like a flashing light. This had to mean something, since Crystal had never glowed like that before. Maybe she knew where the trident was. A moment later, Crystal started flying along the beach, her wings still flashing. Ben got up and followed her. As they headed into the town, Ben wondered where Crystal was taking him. When she finally stopped hovering in the air, Ben looked around in confusion. Behind him, He could see a parking lot and signs indicating taxis and bus stops. There was also a large building with a ticket stand, as well as souvenirs and food. It looked like a tourist attraction. Then, Ben noticed a sign pointing to a set of mysterious caves. Apparently, Crystal wanted him to enter these caves. Ben followed the sign, which indicated that the entrance to the cave was a few steps ahead. Still accompanied by Crystal, he walked down a stone staircase until he came to a short, narrow tunnel. It was a bit dark, but there were handrails that helped Ben walk safely through the tunnel. At the end, he encountered a black metal gate. He tried to open it, but it was locked. This didn't seem to be a problem for Crystal, though. She simply emitted a glowing ray of light that traveled to the gate. As soon as the glow touched the door, it swung open, and they went through carefully. Once they were on the other side, Ben stopped abruptly, and his eyes widened. This had to be the most beautiful place he had ever seen. They were inside a long cave. Its interior was full of hanging stalactites and stalagmites that emerged from the ground. Ben knew that these formations were deposits of different minerals and that they often looked similar to icicles, but he had never seen them in person. The whole ceiling was covered with ancient stalactites of different widths and lengths. Here it felt as if time had stood still. There was also a large body of water in the cave. The water was so clear that Ben could see right to the bottom, and the surface reflected the hanging stalactites on the ceiling. The atmosphere was enhanced by the cave's interior lighting, which had been thoughtfully placed to highlight the natural beauty of the space. The combination of the rock formations, the water, and the lighting made this place look like a dream. It was mesmerizing. Ben stood there speechless as he gazed at his surroundings. The atmosphere inside the cave was cool and damp compared to the summer temperature outside, but to Ben, it felt wonderfully refreshing. Silence reigned inside the cave, apart from the sound of dripping water. Ben immersed himself in the cave's atmosphere with all of his senses. He felt so comfortable and calm as he savored the tranquility of this dreamy place. Closing his eyes, he took a deep breath, determined to remember every single detail of this wonderful yet mysterious cavern. Just then, he felt Crystal's wings fluttering by his ear. This brought him back to the reality of why he was standing there. Crystal's glow was still shining intermittently. Her movements suggested that she wanted Ben to start exploring the cave. He walked slowly and ran his hands around the walls. The light brown stone was textured and grooved and a bit damp. He observed the ceiling carefully, trying to detect any golden shimmers. He kept walking and looking around, but he couldn't find anything. When they were deeper inside the cave, Ben noticed that Crystal's intermittent glowing had become quicker. There were shorter pauses between each glow. It seemed to be acting like a radar detecting the trident's location. This gave Ben an idea. As he moved around, he could observe how Crystal's glow pattern responded. He saw that it became slower in some spots, while it pulsated more quickly in other areas. When Ben got closer to the water, the light flashed even more quickly. This suggested that the trident could very likely be in the water. Ben carefully stepped into the pool. It was clear and shallow. Crystal turned into her fish form and swam next to him. Moving forward through the water, Ben looked for any signs of the golden trident. Crystal's rays were still glowing quickly. As the water got deeper, the cave became a bit wider. It wasn't just a pool, but a magnificent subterranean lake. Ben looked around in amazement. He could never have imagined that the cave would hide such a treasure. Thankfully, the waters were still as clear as before. Beside him, Crystal was glowing, her rays pulsating even faster. Ben was sure that the trident had to be somewhere in this lake. Diving down a few meters, he found that the bottom was mostly covered in marine plants. This made it hard to spot anything that might have sunk to the lake's depths. Some of the plants were short, making it easier to look through them, but the majority were long and leafy. They grew upwards like thin, elongated leaves that danced slowly from side to side, and they were so tall that Ben had to swim through the leaves, using his hands to separate them, and then reaching down to search the bottom of the lake. As much as Ben looked, he couldn't find anything. But Crystal's glow was constant now, and he knew that the trident had to be near. He swam a bit further, moving closer to the center of the lake. Then he took a deep breath and dived to the bottom. Here he saw a bunch of leaves that were tangled around something. He got closer, and as the leaves moved gently with the water's flow, he saw a golden shimmer. Right away, he started untangling the leaves with his fingers. Little by little, a staff made of gold revealed itself. Although it looked like an ordinary stick, it had to be Poseidon's missing trident. Ben grabbed it and swam back to the surface. Crystal's glow was constant now. She examined the trident for a moment, swimming around it in circles. Then she stopped and generated 3 glowing rays that went upwards. They resembled the 3 prongs of a trident. After this, Crystal's glow faded. This could only mean one thing. The staff was indeed Poseidon's golden trident. Ben felt so happy and relieved. Crystal emitted a final glowing ray that pointed in the direction of the sea. When Ben touched it, they were both instantly transported to the spot in the ocean where they had first met. Standing tall in the middle of the waves was Poseidon. He was just as Ben remembered him, an impressive muscular figure with a long tangled beard. At this time, Poseidon was smiling. Ben stepped toward him and placed the golden staff in Poseidon's outstretched hands. When it touched the god's fingers, the staff became longer, and a 3-pronged structure with sharp points emerged at one end. The trident looked powerful, and in Poseidon's hands glorious. His loyal companion Crystal swam to his side and remained there. "Thank you, Ben," said the god of the sea. "You have proven your bravery, honesty, and skills, and you are more than deserving of the magical parchment." Poseidon retrieved the parchment from the water and gave it to Ben. As soon as he touched it, Ben could feel the power emanating from it. "I know you will make good use of this valuable tool," Poseidon said, "but I must leave now." And then he added, "Good luck on your voyages, Ben." Ben watched as Poseidon and Crystal started to swim away further into the ocean. He called out after them, thanking them both for everything. In the distance, Poseidon turned and smiled. Crystal briefly leaped out of the water and twisted in the air before diving down again. Ben felt reassured that they had both heard him. Now that this adventure had ended, Ben realized just how tired he felt in both mind and body. The exhaustion was like a weight. He went back to the hotel and made his way to his room. Here he felt the peace of his cozy little nest again. After taking a relaxing warm shower, Ben made himself comfortable in bed. As he sank into the mattress, he stared at the ceiling, reflecting on all the magical things that he had seen during the last couple of days. He felt completely exhausted, but at the same time, he was deeply grateful that he'd had the chance to meet Poseidon and to help him with something so important. He was also grateful for the time that he had spent with such a magnificent creature as Crystal. Ben felt truly fulfilled. A feeling of deep relaxation ran through his body. As he thought of the magical parchment, Ben imagined all the adventures that he would be able to experience with its help, traveling from one ocean to another. And little by little, Ben peacefully drifted off to sleep. Рекомендация для фона. Calm ocean waves for sleep. https://www.youtube.com/watch Спокойные звуки океана с расслабляющей музыкой идеально для морской приключенческой сказки. May, why the sun and moon came to the sky, combined with gods of the moon and sun elements. To begin with, let's look at the streets and buildings where everyday people live. Lots of houses are joined together in long rows, with little yards and gardens behind them. Built with sand-colored stone and topped with golden roof tiles, they shine like treasure in the daylight. It's a beautiful day, and at the time we see it in late afternoon, the sun glows warm and bright in a clear blue sky. The light shines on the people below who wander about the stone paths and cobbled roads. Here we see townsfolk going about their day, dressed in plain old-fashioned clothing. There's a friendly-faced woman out walking her dog, and coming towards her from the opposite direction, a group of merry children walks home from school with books in hand. When they cross paths, the children wave and say hello to the woman, pausing to pet her dog's fluffy head before continuing on their way. On a different street, other people are still at work, pushing wooden carts along the road filled with goods of every kind. One man sells flowers, and his cart is bursting with color. The smell of those pretty blooms trails behind him everywhere he goes, filling the air with the most wonderfully sweet perfume. It travels with him past the golden houses where parents and children are beginning to return home, and into the high street where the town's best shops are clustered together. Soon he arrives at his own shop, where he pulls up his cart. The few flowers that he still has will go back inside to be sold tomorrow, except for a bouquet of bright red roses that he will take home for his wife. As he packs everything away for the evening, he makes happy chit-chat with the baker next door. She too is out at the shop front, readying her horses and cart for her final delivery before heading home. Her last stop of the day is where she'll take her largest order. It's a request from the palace for 3 boxes of freshly baked bread, pastries, donuts, and other delicious sweet treats. Let's join her now as she sits down upon the open cushioned bench behind 2 magnificent chestnut brown horses. With her wooden cart filled with mouth-watering delights, she pulls gently at the reins and starts on her way. The sound of horses' hooves echoes through the streets as she heads out of town, humming a happy tune and waving to the people that she passes. As she travels, the rows of crowded shop fronts fade into the distance, and the land around her becomes green and alive. The countryside surrounding the town is rich and verdant. Aside from the occasional farmhouse or shepherd herding their flock of sheep, there are very few people here. It's wonderfully peaceful, and the air smells fresh and clean even more so as the road curves uphill where a lush forest borders it on both sides. Apart from the clopping of hooves and wheels upon the road, the only sounds come from the trees, swaying in the breeze, and the gentle twittering of birds returning to their woodland nests. Eventually, the road straightens out, and the forest opens up, revealing the royal palace at the top of the hill. It's exactly what you'd expect from a fairy tale castle. A colossal fortress of white walls and pinkish-gray roofs with a huge silver gate at its front. At either side of the gate stand 2 guardsmen wearing pristine uniforms of silver and purple. They look very official and a little bit serious until they see the familiar face of the baker approaching. Immediately, their expressions change, and they wave to her cheerfully. Then, they open the gate and allow her through. Once inside, the horses follow a neat pathway surrounded by the beautiful royal gardens. There are plants and flowers of every color, and stunning trees reaching up towards the sky. At the front of the castle is a handsome white fountain with water spraying from the mouth of an elegant marble statue. Behind it, 2 staircases rise towards each other, meeting in the middle on a balcony where the massive front doors stand open. Bringing the horses to a stop between the fountain and the steps, the baker hops off her seat and greets the kitchen maids who are waiting there. They wear black dresses with frilly white aprons pinned to their fronts, and their hair is hidden beneath lacy white hats. As always, they are delighted to see the baker and her boxes of sweet treats. They stroke the noses of the friendly horses before lifting the boxes from the cart, and then they wave goodbye as the baker takes up the reins once more and heads back out through the palace gates. Evening is approaching now. Though the baker and her horses are returning home for the day, the staff of the palace kitchen still have work to do, and so they carry the boxes of baked goods inside. Then they help the cook unpack everything and put the final touches on tonight's royal meal. Rows of fresh golden bread sit upon silver trays beside bowls of hot creamy soup. This is the first of many courses to be served tonight. Carefully now, the staff exit the kitchen, walking gracefully across a panel of purple carpet into the main hall of the palace. Here, the soup and bread are served to the royal family, who are already seated at a long marble table against a backdrop of huge arched windows. This is where we meet the prince, his mother the queen, and his father the king. The queen is resplendent in a gown of ruby red velvet, and the men wear stylish suits of blue and silver. They each wear a crown decorated in jewels in every color of the rainbow. The baker's golden rolls are a particular favorite of the family. In fact, though it's not really proper table etiquette, all three of them like to dip the buttered crispy bread into their soup. In between mouthfuls, they make pleasant conversation, discussing the events of the day and any pressing matters of the kingdom. Naturally, it isn't long before the topic of marriage comes up. The king and queen ask their son if he's found a suitable bride yet, and just like always, he tells them that no, he hasn't. The prince has searched far and wide, traveling all across the land to find a worthy princess, but so far, he hasn't succeeded. He's met lots of very nice ladies, to be sure, but none that felt like the right princess for him. Seeing his unhappiness, his mother tells him not to worry. The right person will come along, probably when he least expects it. Здесь текст обрывался в оригинале, но история продолжается мифологической частью о богах Солнца и Луны и Посейдоне. The front doors of the palace were 2 stories tall. The ceilings of the reception rooms, the hallways, and the ballroom almost seemed to disappear into the sky. The Moon Queen had decreed that murals should be painted on them, mimicking the clouds in the heavens. Fresh breezes floated through the hallways, entering through elegant open windows. Rich chandeliers graced each room, twinkling as if they were made of stars. The king and queen felt confident they had built a home that was fit to receive their ocean-dwelling friend and all his people. When they were ready, the royal couple summoned an eagle and asked him if he would deliver an invitation to the god of the sea. The noble bird gladly agreed. They wrote their missive on a scroll and tied it with a glittering gold ribbon. Then the eagle took the pretty thing in his talons and disappeared into the sky. Flapping his powerful wings, he rose over the trees like a kite. The bird traveled quickly. When he reached the water, he cried out to the ocean dwellers below. A dolphin popped its nose out of the water, nodding joyfully. The giant eagle soared gracefully downward and deposited the scroll in its open jaw. The dolphin then leapt smoothly back into the waters, and the bird soared upwards and disappeared again, returning to the skies over the land. Meanwhile, the sun god received his elegant invitation with delight. He dispatched a massive school of shining fish to spread the word. The sea would be traveling to the palace of the sun and the moon, he told his subjects. All all were invited. Wriggling with anticipation, the countless tiny fishes dispersed in little schools. They spread the news quickly and efficiently to all the diverse creatures of the sea. The mighty ruler of the waters attired himself in his most dazzling robe and polished his trident to a high shine. When he was ready, he led the way towards the new palace of the Sun King and the Moon Queen, following instructions they had shared in the scroll. First, he made his way over the sugary white and yellow sands of the beach. Then, he ventured through the shady glens of the ancient forests. In doing so, he took the waters with him. He caused them to swell up and over the powdery sands, flowing over land that had scarcely seen the tide before. Then he channeled the rushing sea through the wide paths of the forest. As he did, he floated on his back, marveling at the swaying trees that danced above his head, playing tricks with the light. He was fascinated by this journey because he had never traveled this far onto the land before. When the trees parted, he continued across the grassy plains. The salt water rushed onward, emerging and spreading out over the lush green grasses and waving wildflowers of the plains. Here, he recognized the wide skies that hung over the ocean. He felt some relief to be back under a familiar canopy of blue. Lastly, as he floated to the end of the grassy meadows, he got his first glimpses of the hills. They pushed up from the earth, rugged in some places and gently rolling in others. Then finally, as promised, he saw their house perched in the foothills. The palace was both vast and majestic. Its towers stretched toward the sky with myriad windows in each level. Its balconies spread generously outwards. They were welcoming and spacious. He could see that the sun and moon had made every effort to create space for him and for all of his ocean-dwelling creatures, and they had certainly come with him. As the water rushed inland, so too did the fishes, the squid, and the little animals in their shells. The sea-living mammals were there as well. Dolphins and whales followed in his wake. Of course, there were also mermaids, who were very plentiful in that time. In fact, the mermaids were probably the most excited of all, because they always enjoyed a fine party. Up in the foothills, the king and queen had been watching for their friend's arrival ever since the eagle returned. Standing on the enormous terrace of the house, they patiently watched in the direction of the coastal waters, happily anticipating this visit. When the blue and green water finally came into view, rushing from the plains, the queen clapped her hands together with delight. She called out to the servants to prepare for their guests. All the doors were opened wide. The god of the sea arrived first, his cloak a vision of shimmering beauty, and his trident sparkling in the rays that came from the sun. With him the cool waters of the ocean, which were soon eagerly exploring the steps, and then the veranda. The gentle waves ran smoothly into the ground floor of the house, pooling quickly in every depression or crevice, then rising upward. This created a path for the ocean-dwelling creatures to enter. First came the little tiny ones, swimming freely in the first few inches of shallow waters that filled the ballroom. Like tiny emissaries, the animals quickly fanned out, taking in this strange new place, glistening in shades of silver and gold and blue and purple. They soon covered every room in the ground floor of the house. They shimmered over the elegant white finish of the marble floors, which lay beneath the waters. The king and queen stood and talked happily with the sea god while this was happening. They had expected some flooding and were not bothered by it. The waters did continue rising, however. As the depth increased, larger creatures were able to enter. A massive squid squeezed itself comically through the door, floating awkwardly inside. Crabs and lobsters crawled over the windowsills, flopping into the interior of the palace. Naturally, some seaweed flowed in along with everything else. The plants did not like to be left out of the fun. Before long, the queen found that her elegant gown was floating around her like an island of gauze. Being extremely well-mannered, she acted like nothing was amiss. However, it concerned her a little bit that the water was already more than waist-high. The sea god couldn't help noting her discomfort. He asked if he should stop his people from coming in, but the queen dismissed this notion. She told him all his creatures were welcome, and that the house was quite sure to be big enough in the end. Taking her at her word, he continued to allow the water to flow inside. Now that it was shoulder deep on the king and queen, the array of swimming guests became truly impressive. The dolphins splashed playfully into the ballroom and engaged in a boisterous dance. The sharks slid gracefully through the flooded windows, circling the room like crafty wallflowers. Most beautiful, however, were the mermaids with their multi-hued scales glittering in the sun. They swam gracefully onto the terrace like dancers. They dipped and splashed, some perching on the railing and others floating and sunning themselves. Looking around, the Sun King found himself wondering how any additional sea creatures could possibly exist. It seemed they were all here in his house. The water continued to rise, though. Soon the god of the sea asked if they should perhaps move to the second floor of the house. Or, he added, should he stop his people from coming now? Ever gracious, the king and queen again assured him that there was no need to limit the guests. They did, however, agree that it would be easier to continue socializing from an upper floor. Alas, this solution was short-lived. The royal couple soon found themselves waist-deep in water on the second floor as well. While they continued to insist that their house had room for everyone, they found it necessary to rise upward again this time, to the uppermost floor of the house. At this point, the god of the sea politely excused himself. He had noticed a commotion coming from the ballroom, and he suspected that there was a squabble happening between the jellyfish and the sea urchins, both of which tended to be rather impatient and territorial. Excusing himself, he dove down through the waters to the submerged ground floor and disappeared. The Sun King and the Moon Queen tried to wait for him, but they found themselves treading water and retreated to one of the tall towers that jutted skyward out of the house. Slowly climbing the spiral staircase of the turret, they were only ever a few steps ahead of the rushing waves. Finally alone, they looked at each other with a rueful smile. It was obvious to both of them that, despite their hopes, their enormous house had not been big enough to receive the entire population of the sea. Peeking out the window at the top of the turret, they could see the party in full swing down below. As far as they could see from their house to the distant beach, there was water covering every surface. As they stood there trying to figure out what to do, the trusty eagle flew by. The Moon Queen called out to him and asked him if he might be able to rescue them from their predicament. Flapping his powerful wings, he hovered near the turret. The sun and moon gratefully squeezed through the window and climbed onto his back. Then, pushing off with a mighty surge, the eagle rose into the sky. He flew higher than the tops of the mountains and up through the clouds. As they climbed in altitude, the Sun King and the Moon Queen glanced below them at their palace, which was now just another part of the ocean. Then they both laughed and shook their heads. Looking at each other with a shrug, they sprang from the eagle's back and waved goodbye to him, floating up into the sky. As much as they had enjoyed meeting the creatures of the sea, they were so relieved to once again be where it was quiet and dry. All around them, the stars glittered peacefully with excitement at their arrival. So it was that they decided to stay. After that time, the sun and moon still generously shared their light day and night with the land and the sea, but they chose to do it from a safe distance forevermore. They made the sky their home, while the god of the sea spread out over his own watery domain, and that is how the world has happily remained to this day. 6. The Princess and the Pea. Once upon a time, there was a prince who wanted to marry a princess, but she would have to be a real princess. He traveled all over the world to find one, but nowhere could he get what he wanted. There were princesses enough, but it was difficult to find out whether they were real ones. There was always something about them that was not as it should be. So he came home again and was sad, for he wanted very much to have a real princess. One evening, a terrible storm came on. There was thunder and lightning, and the rain poured down in torrents. Suddenly, a knocking was heard at the city gate, and the old king went to open it. It was a princess standing out there in front of the gate. But good gracious, what a sight the rain and the wind had made her look. The water ran down from her hair and clothes. It ran down into the toes of her shoes and out again at the heels. And yet she said that she was a real princess. Well, we'll soon find that out, thought the old queen. But she said nothing, went into the bedroom, took all the bedding off the bedstead, and laid a pea on the bottom. Then she took 20 mattresses and laid them on the pea, and then 20 eider-down beds on top of the mattresses. On this, the princess had to lie all night. In the morning, she was asked how she had slept. "Oh, very badly," said she. "I have scarcely closed my eyes all night. Heaven only knows what was in the bed, but I was lying on something hard, so that I am black and blue all over my body. It's horrible." Now they knew that she was a real princess because she had felt the pea right through the 20 mattresses and the 20 eider-down beds. Nobody but a real princess could be as sensitive as that. So the prince took her for his wife, for now he knew that he had a real princess, and the pea was put in the museum, where it may still be seen if no one has stolen it. There, that is a true story.